Welcome to The Aspiring Kryptonians, a podcast for Superman fans, hosted by Superman fans and focused around all things, you guessed it, Superman. After all, we are aspiring Kryptonians. From comics, TV, film and animation, each week we discuss our thoughts on the latest releases, news and even some retrospective reviews. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road. Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Aspiring Kryptonians podcast with me, Tasmin, and the rest of the team. Ashley? And
hi guys.
Evan.
Hello.
Well, this week we're blessed with the presence of a writer that I've really come to admire recently, and that writer is Brandon Easton. So Brandon, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today. It's an absolute honor.
It is a pleasure to be here, and especially with fellow Superman fans. So I've always really enjoyed your little blog and your pictures on Instagram. So, you know, I'm always trying to find that community of Superman fans. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. So for those that don't know, Brandon has worked on countless franchises, including DC, Marvel, Transformers, Judge Dredd, Thundercats. There's a plethora of more characters and franchises too, but that's just to name a few. And we will, of course, talk about a few of those and his career in a little more detail. But for us Superman fans, Brandon wrote a phenomenal story in Superman Red and Blue issue 1, and also wrote the Superman story in Truth and Justice. Evan's holding it up just there. Truth and Justice issue 2, or issues 4, 5, and 6, if you read them online. Yeah, I guess we'll kind of start from the beginning for you in terms of your career. Can you sort of talk us through your entry into comics?
Sure. I first started trying to break into comics around, I'd say, back in the 1900s. About 98, 99 was like my official kind of push into the business. I mean, I had graduated from college and had been writing for quite some time, but I couldn't really make the shift from nonfiction or journalism because I actually had written for a couple of newspapers over the years, but I couldn't jump into the creative side. So to make a long story short, after a really crazy period of time, I managed to break into my first comic book gig in 2002 on a series called Arcanium at Dreamwave Productions. That was back with Pat Lee and his people way back in the day. And actually the artist on that book was LaShawn Thomas, who's now did Cannon Busters. He worked on the Boondocks, and he has Yasuke on Netflix right now. So it was very interesting to break in with a guy who I had very similar artistic, connections with. I mean, we were very much influenced by anime and American comics and manga as well, Japanese manga and American comics. So it was really cool to work with him, and we've had, various different, career highlights, but it was very interesting to work with folks like that early on in their careers and to see all these people from back then do all these incredible things. And really, there was a big gap in my comic book career from like 2004 to 2011 or so. And during that time, I was teaching full time, so I really couldn't concentrate on my comic book career, but I was developing and writing my own original graphic novel called Shadow Law, and it took me like 8 years to get that done. I went through like 6 or 7 creative teams, hired and fired them to get this project done, and eventually I got it done from 2004 to 2010 or so, and it was released in January 2012, and that was kind of my reintroduction to the scene, because I had been missing and absent for a very long time in comics. And from that point on, I skipped over a lot, including my move to LA from the East Coast of the United States. And I had broken into Hollywood, on a Thundercats reboot in 2011. So right around that time, a lot of different things started to gel for me. And from then on, I had just got more work in comics and just built on top of that. And then eventually got more work in television and built on top of that to bring me up to the modern age for my career. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of how I got it.
Awesome. And then I had a question for you. Why comics? What is it about this medium that makes it special?
Well, I think comics, there's a great phrase. I don't know if it was Neil Gaiman who said it or if it was Scott McCloud who wrote the Understanding Comics book, but it was like comic books, I'm paraphrasing, comic books are words and pictures, and there's nothing you can't do with words and pictures, right? So the amalgamation of just those two things in a two-dimensional form, like I can blow up the earth 57 times in a comic book, like a 22-page comic or 24-page comic or a graphic novel, right? Whereas if on television, that would cost a whole lot of money. In film, that would cost a whole lot of money. So I feel like comics are only hemmed in by the level of your imagination in a narrative capacity. Also, there's editorial concerns, but generally speaking, I feel like you can tell any story you really want to tell in the graphic novel or comic book format medium than other types of mediums, which require a great deal of money to realize your vision. Not to say comics are easy or cheap to produce, but you can do a lot more on a page than you can do in a half-hour pilot or a 60-minute pilot, with the current limitations of budget and networks and things of that nature. Yeah. So I just feel like you can do whatever you want.
That's good.
Within limit, as long as it's not too offensive or anything. But I feel like you can do whatever you want in a comic book, and just realize whatever your artistic vision might be and what you want to say about the world as well. I believe.
That's a really good answer. So which has been your favorite sort of title to work on, or a particular character or franchise?
Wow, that's a tough one. I mean, all of them really were my favorites on some level. I mean, I believe I'm the first African-American writer to ever write Judge Dredd, like ever, and that was huge for me because I loved the character and I loved the, 2000 AD stuff. And I really loved the Judge Dredd book called America, which came out way back in the day. But that one like really made me understand what the character should be. And you're not supposed to root for him, really.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't get that, but he's not the hero per se. He's a reflection of Margaret Thatcher's Great Britain, and that's a whole other story. But I mean, the Transformers War for Cybertron was a personal victory for me, which is currently on Netflix. I got a chance to write a good chunk of season 1, which was called Siege. And it really changed. I mean, everything I ever wanted to do creatively, I was able to do in that series. So, I mean, I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but it in terms of wrapping the bow and closing the circle of fulfillment from my childhood in the Transformers, being a massive fan most of my life and being able to tell the story I always wanted to tell within somebody else's framework. That was it for me. I mean, I don't need to tell any more Transformers stories because I got to tell the story I wanted to tell. So stuff like that, but really the Andre the Giant book, Closer to Heaven, that was amazing. God, I loved working on that as a lifelong wrestling fan and being able to tell a story that showed the humanity behind the pro wrestling scene, which is, the behind the scenes of pro wrestling is much better than the stuff you see on TV, or imagine it's like the behind the scenes is crazy. I mean, they did a great movie a couple of years ago called Fighting with My Family.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the behind. The stuff in the ring is great, but how you get to that point, that stuff is insane and intense. Yeah. So, I would say that there's something in every project that I've gotten to contribute to that was not mine, that I was hired on, that I was able to find a favorite thing in. So there's not like one, it's just like an amalgamation of great moments.
Yeah.
From all
That's good though.
All those experiences.
Yeah. So you've obviously done a lot that you're very proud of, which is amazing, and onwards and upwards.
Thank you.
As I mentioned, you've worked on a lot of different sort of franchises and characters. So when you choose your sort of next project, how do you go about it? Do you pick a particular character that you're interested in? Like you said, you were a Transformers fan as a child, or are you happy to take on new characters and sort of put in the research?
Well, first it has to be who's going to hire me. That's number one. I mean, there's a lot of stuff I would love to work on, but I'm not getting close to ever, really. I mean, but now realistically, from a market, like as the market stands, you have to be, someone has to hire you.
Yeah.
Usually you get an email out of the blue from some editor or assistant in a production company or somebody at a studio, and they're like, "Hey, Brandon, we like what you did with this. Would you like to sit down for a meeting?" And usually it's an impromptu pitch session, so you better have some ideas when you show up. Same thing for comics. Like I'll get an email from an editor out of the blue.
Yeah.
And then every now and then I'll be like, "Hey, I really would like to work on this. Is there, if you ever have a slot, I'd like to do it." And that usually leads to about a 2-year back and forth email. And then eventually you might get a gig and you might get a chance to pitch. But it's not as easy as, I wish it was as easy as like, "Hey, I would love to work on Blade Runner. Hire me." No. Yeah, a lot of times you got to wait until somebody reaches out to you. But over the years, what usually happens is that you cultivate those connections through relationships. I mean, every real industry is about building those. Everyone, I'm pretty sure you've heard this before, but it's all about relationships. So really, if people like you and you do good work and you're not a jackass, people will be like, "Hey, hey, we should probably put him on something." So that's how it works usually. I mean, I've been very fortunate to end up in those scenarios where I would work on things I want to work on, but there have been things that I wasn't really a fan of. I'm not going to say, but I was hired on. And I did the best I could,
Just made it work for you.
But when you're hired on something you are a fan on, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. So do you have like a little book or something written of all the pictures and ideas that you've got for all these different characters in case you get a meeting, or how does it work for you?
No, I don't keep really a book of pitches. What I try to do is I file them away up here. And if the opportunity arises, then I'll be like ready to go. But no, I mean, it's usually a thing where you don't want to torture yourself with the possibility. Like I don't want to sit around and be like, "Boy, I would like to work on Dune. I want to work on Dune," knowing that what's his name, Frank Herbert's son and Kevin J. Anderson don't hire people really. So I'm not going to be like, "Oh, I'm going to work on Dune someday." I probably won't. So I won't that won't be in boiling inside of me. But there are things that are possible that I keep a mental Rolodex for, and hopefully when that day comes, I'm ready to go.
Yeah, cool.
What would be your like one of your top things that you would like to do?
Well, Star Wars, I'm not, well, actually, I submitted a Star Wars comic short story. I don't know if they'll approve it, but Star Wars is one, Blade Runner, Dune. Let's see. There's quite a few, actually. I mean, I did Judge Dredd, so I mean, that's off the list. And I have my Infinity Gauntlet of properties I'd like to work on. I would love to do like BattleTech. I did some Warhammer stuff, but I'm not like the biggest Warhammer like fan because I don't understand. It's so huge. But I've gotten to write some Warhammer stuff. But BattleTech would be one. Star Wars obviously is like way high on that list. I've gotten to write Star Trek, so that's off the list. Yeah, and some Marvel stuff, but I don't know if that'll ever happen.
Speaking of Marvel stuff, didn't you write some action or some Marvel action Spider-Man?
That was actually through IDW because they have a young adult deal with Marvel. So Marvel didn't hire me, IDW hired me. IDW has been very, very good to me.
Nice.
I am in their debt, and I will always give them all the respect and love in the world for taking a chance on me when literally no other publisher would. So I got to do Marvel Action Spider-Man, which was a dream to write Spider-Man. I got to write Miles, Gwen, and Peter. I mean, it was a trifecta. I was like, okay, well, I don't need to write any more Spider-Man because I wrote all the Spider people. So, but that was a lot of fun. I also got to write Night Thrasher from the New Warriors in a short story in Civil War II from like maybe 2015 or 2016. I can't remember. But yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I haven't had the traction at Marvel I would like. But there's a few characters and properties in Marvel I would love to take a shot at. But Spider-Man was my jewel, so I'm happy with that.
Nice. Well, my 4-year-old daughter and I have collected some of those, and she really enjoys those.
Awesome.
So how did you sort of enjoy writing those characters? So well, even in the Superman stories that we're about to talk about shortly, and I'm guessing because Evan kind of put this question to me, but in Action Spider-Man, does it kind of give you more, so it's out of continuity, isn't it? So does it give you more freedom and room for creativity, or do you find that it's a bit more challenging?
No. I mean, I'm trying to figure out what I can say without violating any like NDA stuff. Okay, so basically, a lot of the stuff that Marvel licenses to other publishers, right? Those things have a set of guidelines, just like TV standards and practices. And when it's specifically when they're aimed at a YA audience or a preteen audience, there's like this list of rules, which are justified, but there's a list of rules that some things are almost unreasonable in some cases, things you can't and can't say or do. So you have to be very creative to figure out ways to show like action or a fight scene without it violating those guidelines. So it's actually tougher when it's out of continuity, and particularly when it's aimed toward younger audiences, because Marvel Action Spider-Man is sold in Kmart, or Kmart may not be around anymore, but Walmart or like a Target. Like those are going to be places where people who've never been in a comic book shop ever, they're going to pick that up. So when they pick it up, you got to be real careful of what you include and what you don't, so that there's no blowback, particularly in the more conservative and traditional regions of the US or the world, where like, for example, you can't have Gwen, unclothed, like say like in a bikini or something. Not that that's, not that you want to do that, but it's not a good idea to do that, because there are places in, globally where a young woman without her clothes on could be controversial, even if it's a swimsuit, which I understand that, I get it completely, but it's just one of those things you have to keep in mind. So when you're writing a scene, or you're writing an issue, there are things that you may not even realize you're violating, because it's just so simple that you don't think about it, but you have to be very careful about some stuff you put in. So it's actually a lot tougher doing the licensed books that are out of continuity than there are within continuity. Because if you're writing a Marvel comic, it can get about PG-13. So I don't know what that designation is, would be in Great Britain. Maybe it's like 12 or 15. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, 12.
Like for the ratings. Yeah. So like, about 12. Like, so if you go Marvel, you can push a lot more in a Marvel comic. Like in the recent X-Men books, they've gone real far sexually, more so than I would thought they would go. And I'm just like, whoa, kids are reading this stuff, but so yeah, it's a lot tougher, definitely.
Yeah. So did you kind of put your ideas to IDW and then they sort of said, oh, you can't do this bit, you can't do that bit? Or did you have the guidelines in place before and then you sort of wrote accordingly?
It's kind of both, because I was offered the gig and I pitched it, and then I wrote the script. I was hired, the contract came in, so I wrote the script. And then what happens is the script goes to IDW, and IDW is like, this looks great. But when you send it to Marvel in New York, they have an additional set of things that you can't do, because it kind of shifts a lot. Because, for example, if a movie's coming out and you happen to be a character from the movie is in the book you're writing, you have to be extremely careful not to violate or cross a line, not necessarily in content, but in terms of like what they want to do in the movie. So if you unconsciously or unknowingly mimic a scene from the movie, that's gone immediately. And that can throw your whole book into shambles, which means that you got to be real careful. Luckily, there was no Spider-Man film out when I was doing that, so I was able to put things in. And with a character that I think the Shocker has not shown up in a Marvel movie. Well, technically he did, but in was it Not Far From Home, Homecoming? Bokeem Woodbine would technically have been the Shocker, but they didn't go that route. But you didn't see him in the full costume, so it's one of those things where you got to be real careful about that. Yeah. And but generally speaking, you get hired, you write the script, it goes to IDW, then it goes to Marvel, and then Marvel's notes is when things get crazy.
Brandon, IDW are one of my favorite publishers. They've just got such a great plethora of licensed products. Is there anything else you'd like to work on? Maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or?
Good question. I mean, the Turtles would be great if I would get to write them as they should have, like how they're being written, excuse me, how they've been written in The Last Ronin, which is out now. Like I want it to be that like dark, gritty New York Daredevil satire that the original Turtles book actually was, which a lot of people don't understand that. But yeah, if I can go in that, the more gritty street, living in the sewers, Turtles, I would love to write Ninja Turtles. But there again, that's a major license with like a 35-year or maybe 40-year pedigree. 30-year pedigree at this point. So you got to be real careful about stuff like that. So with that being said, I would say, Turtles. But I'm trying to think what else is at IDW that I haven't written that I've written a lot of stuff that they have licenses for. So I can't imagine. I mean, yeah. I mean, I did Mask, and and then I did Transformers, So yeah, I'm good. I mean, IDW has been very good to me. Other than Star Wars, there's nothing else that they're holding that I really want to jump into.
All right, well, let's do Superman.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So this compared to the first section, this section is going to be pretty damn long because, of course, it's the Superman podcast. So yeah, more the merrier. But what is it about the character that sort of drew you to him?
Well, I mean, this will probably answer like several of the questions you have, but it'll be the 1970, Superman movie, directed by Richard Donner, starring Christopher Reeve and the gang. I saw the film when I was very, very young. I might have been 4 or 5 when I first saw it. And it made such an indelible impact, just like Star Wars and Raiders of the Lost Ark, Jaws. I'm part of that generation. I was born in the 70s. So like I was I got to see the modern blockbuster take shape. Yeah. I watched Alien, I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I saw E.T., I saw Blade Runner, I saw John Carpenter's The Thing. All those things were all just a part of my DNA, So Superman, I mean, it really spoke to me. I don't know what it was. It was just a really incredible movie. And I'd seen the comics, obviously, but I didn't really connect to the comics, but the movie really pushed me toward the comics. Yeah. So I would say that movie, and the Super Friends cartoon by Hanna-Barbera, Superman was always my favorite character because he would always have this really kind of arrogant, condescending, kick-ass line. I mean, my favorite one, I'll tell you what started, he was fighting it was the stupidest episode ever. They were fighting a genie, and the genie came out the bottle, and the Superman him back into I swear to God, he blew him back into the lamp, right? And he said, "That'll teach you not to smoke." And it was like the greatest line ever. If you haven't seen it, the episode is called "Rub 3 Times for Disaster." You may be able to find it like on some not YouTube because it's blocked by Warner Brothers, but and you can find that episode of Super Friends. It is the most ridiculous thing. But Superman is the biggest jackass, biggest jerk in that episode. But it works. It so works. He's fighting a genie. Anyway, so stuff that made me connect to the character. And then these Crisis on Infinite Earths. John Byrne did the reboot of Man of Steel comics, and then it was a whole different Superman. It was a very accessible Superman. Yeah. And I think I just stuck with the character from there. I mean, I just like the idea of someone unironically championing the cause of truth, justice, and the American way in its purest sense. Because once you remove all the cynicism and corruption, those ideas have merit. Like the U.S. Constitution built off the Magna Carta. It's like those ideas, the Declaration of Independence, the ideas rather than the execution is what really sticks to me. And Superman, I feel the same way about the character, which is why I've tried to imbue when I write the character with those ideas,
Yeah.
That's how Superman is for me, that's what, I love him.
Yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah, well, we all do.
So what what storylines?
I missed it. What was that?
Sorry. So like what storylines for you, because in the comics, have really stood out and that are like your favorites? Because for me, like John Byrne, that's my jumping off point too. Like, and I've just followed that through line in the comics as well.
I have a lot of answers to that. I'm trying to figure out how to curate them for this. Okay, so one of my favorite Superman stories of all time, was, I think Gil Kane drew it. It was the one where you saw the first time the cyborg version of Brainiac, the one that looks like a Terminator. It was like Action, I forgot, it was Action Comics 213. I want to say it was 213, it was around there. But basically, it was the first time you saw the modern version of Brainiac, which they've retracted from, but it looked like the Terminator. He kind of looked like the Terminator endoskeleton.
Yeah.
And that version of Brainiac with the skull ship with the tentacles underneath, that thing scared me as a kid. And it was like he had no emotion and Superman had to fight him, right? And then the crazy thing was that Brainiac was like, dude, do you think that you could attack me? I know what kills you, and I know what makes you weak. And he fired red kryptonite torpedoes at him. And so Superman had to like escape from these red kryptonite torpedoes that were homing in on him. And the only way he destroyed them, he flew through the heart of a star. And even as he was being weakened, he still had to destroy them, and the torpedoes blew up. But it took that. And then when he came out the other side, he figured, you know what, I need to go to the future and get the legion of superheroes to help me with this. And then Brainiac followed him to whatever, 31st, whatever the century that is in DC universe. Yeah. But that storyline of just him fighting Brainiac, a Brainiac that wasn't making any jokes. He was like literally Hal. He was like the Hal 9000. Like he was just like straight up, hello, Dave. I like to ask no question, Dave. Open the power bay doors, Hal. I can't do that. That's how that Brainiac was, right? So that was one of the first, like that was late 70s, early 80s. That stuck with me. The Man of Steel reboot stuck with me. Also, Alan Moore's Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. That really stuck with me, huge. And then like more modern stuff, I really liked, there was a storyline called Exile, which was like 89 or 90, where I think he left Earth because I forgot who did it, but somebody was messing with his brain, and he split himself into two. So he was also Gangbuster, and he was also Superman. And then there was a point when they ripped open the Gangbuster costume, and it was the Superman shield, and he was like, "Oh my God, I can't trust myself because I have a split personality now." And he exiles himself to deep space, right? And then he gets into really deep space, and he finds the Kryptonian cleric, which introduces him to the Eradicator, which is that little ball, which caused so much trouble over the years. But the first appearance of the Kryptonian Eradicator is in the Exile storyline. And that is one of the best and the most underrated Superman arcs in the character's history, because it was very well constructed from beginning to end till the point he comes back to Earth. And it's like, that to me was like a quintessential Superman story. Obviously, Doomsday, was one of, and also What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, the one where he fights the authority, versions where like the anti-heroes, where the elite, Superman versus the Elite, which was the animated version.
Oh, the animated version was very good.
Yeah.
Oh, that was incredible. I mean, I love that final battle when they're on the moon. He basically loses his temper finally. And also the Justice League animated series, like the final episode when he says the dark side Brainiac amalgam. He says, I feel like I live in a world of cardboard, always taking care not to break something or break someone. But now I get to let it. He says like, you big man, you can take it. So now there's a rare opportunity for me to show you just how powerful I really am. And it's when he reels back and it's like, whoa, like that moment is one of the greatest Superman moments in history. So stuff like that obviously has stuck with me. And then some of the modern stuff has, but those storylines have like kind of informed my Superman writing.
Awesome. It's great stuff.
So I kind of guess this kind of links in with what we've sort of already talked about with the truth and justice, but what to you are the core fundamentals of Superman? So when it comes to your take on the character, what traits or ideas do you have to involve? What's key for you?
He can't, for me, it's like he can't do everything. He can't solve every problem. He can't save every life. And that weighs on him. Yeah. But what he tries to do is provide an example for other people to step in and do the right thing when it's necessary. You know, and that comes from that great line in Superman 1 where I think Marlon Brando says a thing about, you know, they can be a great people, Kal-El, if they wish to be. It is for that, their capacity for good. Yeah. It is for that reason I have sent them you, my only son, which is a very New Testament-y thing. But that line is in everything I write. Anytime I write Superman, that line is underscoring everything. So to be an example, to not be a savior, but to show you what you can be, that's, to me, the fundamentals of the character.
Yeah. Nice. And I think, again, this links. Evan, have you got something? Sorry.
No, I was just going to move on to this, but if you got more stuff.
No, yeah, I was going to say, let's move on to Superman Red and Blue. And I think what you've just said pretty much outlines some of the questions that I've got for that as well. But yeah, I'd like to go into detail on the sort of 2 Superman titles that you've done. But obviously we'll talk about Superman Red and Blue issue 1, where your story was titled The Measure of Hope. So we've talked about this story on the podcast before, and I declared it my favorite story of the issue, and I think the other 2 agreed with me. It's one of those ones that really stick with you, and when you read it,
thank you.
It's just, yeah, it just sticks with you. But first of all, how did this project come about? So this is quite an unusual comic because it's kind of an anthology comic series with loads of different creative teams. And did you kind of approach DC, or how did they reach out to you? How did that come about?
So, okay, this is a funny story. So basically, after I had gotten hired, and which was I still don't know how I got hired, but after I got hired to work on the Future State Mr. Miracle back story, the backup stories.
Yeah.
I had written a very, very passionate email to the editorial team saying that, look, I know that I'm new. You don't know who I mean, you know, you're giving me a chance, but if I could just ever get a chance to write anything Superman while I'm in this mix,
yeah,
I'll take a 5-pager, I'll take a 3-pager, just give me a shot, whatever you can do, right? And they got back to me and they said, well, we have 2 things. We have this Truth and Justice thing, and we have Red and Blue.
Yeah.
And Red and Blue is only like 8 pages or something like that, 5 pages, whatever. And Truth and Justice is 30 pages.
Yeah.
If you can come up with some ideas. So I said, look, well, for Red and Blue, this is what I want to pitch. And I pitched that. And then for Truth and Justice, I pitched a mass incarceration storyline. So I didn't think either one was going to go through, honestly. I was like, hey, well, I gave it a shot. At the end of the day, as long as you say I put all, and then they both got approved. And I was like, oh,
good timing.
I can't believe this. And so that's what happened. That's how that got started.
Awesome.
Nice. How about in terms of creative team? Did you pitched the ideas with the artists then assigned to you, or did you sort of handpick them?
No, I'll let you know this. When you are hired by whoever it is, you very rarely have any input into who they bring on. Unless you're like a higher level, much higher level, you could say, I'd like to work with that person. And if that person happens to be available and affordable, then you'll get that person. Yeah. But generally speaking, the editors already have an idea who they want to pair with you. Okay. And you just pray that person does what they need to do.
Yeah.
And obviously Steve Lieber is incredible. So it worked out for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love his artwork on Jimmy Olsen, but the artwork in your story for Superman Red and Blue is very different to what we're used to from the Jimmy Olsen series that he did. It's it's really shown his range, which I was quite surprised by, to be honest, because I'm not familiar with much of his other stuff other than that. What was it like working with him in Ron Chan?
Well, in terms of the colorist, I never met him, never spoke to him ever. Okay. But with Steve is a bit, well, first of all, I'm from Baltimore. I'm born and raised in Baltimore, Maryland. And The Wire, it's a very popular show that depicts the drug and, law enforcement angles of Baltimore City. It was a very acclaimed show on it. So with the subject matter of The Measure of Hope being what it was, he was able to kind of inject that aesthetic and that kind of grittiness and that kind of almost hopelessness in a way into the story visually. So he already understood the shorthand of Baltimore life without me having to, even though it's not set in Baltimore, but the story is very, very semi-autobiographical.
Yeah.
So he understood the shorthand of it all, the shorthand of addiction, the shorthand of the incredible impact. And if you've watched The Wire, you see over the 5 seasons just how how drug addiction destroys human life, destroys human potential, particularly when there's no treatment and only prosecution. It's just a horrific thing. And he was able to understand what I was getting at without me having to over-explain it.
Yeah.
So I think that the choice of Lieber on this particular story was the absolute perfect choice without me even having to suggest it. I didn't have anybody to suggest, so that's how that worked out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, you kind of gone into sort of why you sort of chose this theme for the story. But it's sort of very different to what we used to. So usually with a Superman book, we kind of see him take on aliens or bad guys. But this is a real breath of fresh air. You took on a real subject. In this case, like you said, it was drug addiction. So where did this obviously you were influenced by Baltimore and The Wire, but why was it important for you to sort of showcase that in your take on Superman?
Well, I mean, the scene, and I very rarely talk about this. This is actually the first time I ever talked about this publicly. The scene in the kitchen scene actually happened to me.
Oh.
That actually happened.
Wow.
So that moment has seared itself into my consciousness, and it will be there until my dying day, and perhaps beyond if there is anything, right? So I don't usually talk about my family. I don't usually, especially on social media, there's nothing about my personal or private life on social media. I just don't believe personally, not judging anybody else, but me, I don't put that out there because it can create problems, right?
Yeah.
But that story came from my life, and one of the things that helped me, and I'll say this much, one of the things that kept me on the straight and narrow, particularly after the crack cocaine explosion in America's inner cities in the late 80s, was my love of science fiction and comic books, and video games, and anime. That stuff kept me from getting involved in all the stupidity and horrors that I saw, because I always make this joke. There was an episode of The Simpsons where Marge had lost her mind. Her hair was falling out. And what happened was her family had driven her crazy. So the funniest moment in that episode is she had cleaned the kitchen and it was spotless. And they walked in the kitchen and the door swung one way and it was clean. And when the door swung the other way, a split second later, it was completely destroyed. I use that as a context. That's what Baltimore felt like. It felt like the summer of '89. I had went outside and it was absolutely pristine. And then the next morning, crack had it was like, I can't even think of a way to describe it, but it felt like the earth had been we had a comet impact had just smacked into Baltimore. And I was just like, people who I had loved, or like elders in my community were just destroyed. Like people were just like not who they were. And it was one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century, next to the AIDS crisis, next to World War II and World War I, like the crack cocaine explosion, to me and to many historians, is one of the greatest tragedies of the 20th century. And I saw it, I had a front row seat at it because it was in my house too. So that stuck with me, and the thing is that the societal response to inner city or African American or Black drug addiction was not treatment, it was prosecution. It was, let's make a war on drugs. Instead of it being a war on drugs, it was a war on people, which led to mass incarceration. So that was all a part of me because I saw it happen. Like for me, it's not hyperbole. I didn't read about it in the book. I lived it. And I've never done that. I mean, I never got involved in any of that stuff. But when you walk into a kitchen and a family member is abusing that, it shatters your perception of reality, because suddenly they're no longer, because anyone who's ever dealt with someone who's been a hardcore drug or alcohol, suffered from alcohol or drug addiction, that person is no longer that person. It's almost like The Exorcist. Like there's a monster, that person is inside, but the monster is what you see, right? So that is what kind of was the foundation of the measure of hope in its purest sense. Yeah.
Jeez. Well, you came through the other side, and I think the very real experience that you had has really come through and shone through in this story, because it feels so real. It's not
so authentic.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something that someone's just nitpicked.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'll do it about that. You can really feel the realness in it. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And speaking of realness, we'll obviously Truth and Justice. Red and Blue is a very short story compared to Truth and Justice, and obviously not to take away any of the meaning behind it and everything. But we'll move on to that one. And I'm sure I can speak for everybody here, but I love when Superman tackles real life problems, especially ones that are happening right now, as this pretty much is. So that's something I really appreciated in this storyline. So for me, I think I've tagged you in a post before saying this is my favorite Superman comic of 2021, and it's still the case.
Thank you so much. I want to say seriously, like, thank you for putting because it's like every little bit helps. Yeah. Because I am literally the new person on the block. You know, they did trust me, but I'm still new. You know, and there's much more accomplished people. But anytime anybody says they liked it, like legitimately, not just saying, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
I mean, I've said it to you, but now I can say it to you.
Yeah.
So hopefully someday I'll end up in in London. I'll be like, hey, what's up? Thank you. You know. But yeah.
Yeah. Remember us when you're famous. Yeah. So tell us a bit about how this story sort of came to be, and how did you get involved with the title? I guess you kind of went into that at the beginning, but how did the story itself come to be for you?
Sure. The editor, Andrew Marino, awesome guy. You know, he had some ideas for Truth and Justice. And then I just had this idea, like, okay, you opened a great door. So Superman, the animated series, is one of my favorite cards. I mean, everybody talks about Batman, the animated series, which is fine. It's great. Yeah. But the Superman show was so good too, and it's so underrated. My favorite episode from that is called The Late Mr. Kent. It's the one where, where Clark dies, and then he's trying to unravel a murder mystery. A guy's about to be executed for a crime he says he didn't commit, and then over the course of the episode, Clark originally is investigating, and then he dies. But what I love so much about that was a good chunk of the episode was Clark being a reporter. And as a former, journalist, I used to write for the Boston Herald newspaper. You know, I know what that feels like. I know what that looks like. I know what it sounds like, and they don't do enough with Clark as a reporter. He is supposedly one of the best in the country, supposedly, right? Even though he deliberately doesn't write the best to get he could get a Pulitzer every time he wrote if he wanted. But he doesn't do that. But I wanted to do an episode, I wanted to do an issue, a story where Clark is the protagonist, where he's like going out on the street, asking people questions, being like, look, what's going on with this? And mass incarceration, if anything. And I've read, Michelle Alexander's book, the new Jim Crow, which is all about mass incarceration. And I felt like if Clark had read that, there's no way he would sit there and be like, oh, well, let me throw this book away. He would go out there and be like, let me find out a little bit more. Yeah. And he does. And he stumbles across a case that he could solve. So that was kind of the genesis of it. Like, I want more Clark as a reporter at the Daily Planet. This is the New York Times of the DC universe, right? Yeah. For all intents and purposes. So if that's the case, he has to do a job. Like, he has to be working at least 50 hours, right? At least, right? So what is he doing other than arguing with Lois about nonsense? No, he's going to go out there and write articles, hit the beat. And that's what really inspired that. I wanted to see a Clark story as a reporter, working, earning his paycheck. And that's where that comes from, you know?
No, I really enjoyed the fact that Clark was more of the, well, he wasn't more of the hero than Superman, but he certainly played a bigger part in it. So going back to the sort of creative team and things like that, Janoy Lindsay was the artist for the series, and colorist Marissa Louise. Was it the same kind of thing? They picked those people for you as well? Did you get to
exactly?
How was it like working with them?
They were fine. I mean, there was actually a person who I had originally thought would be perfect for it. That person was, it's one of those things where it's availability, you know? He wasn't available. So the next guy, I mean, Andrew had a list of his own, obviously, and Janoy was on the top of it. And that was that.
Are you able to say who your first choice would have been?
I can't say that because it's not a good idea. But yeah, I'm actually, well, yeah, he's a good person. He's a fantastic artist, but it just didn't work out because he was working for somebody else.
Fair enough. Now, I'm not sure sort of how long ago this was sort of put into motion, because obviously you said it can be an email and it happens straight away, or it can take a few years and things like that. But did you guys, well, with what's going on, how did that influence anything? So obviously you had the George Floyd sort of things with the police brutality. Did that inspire some of the events of the comic issues?
Believe it or not, George Floyd did not come into it. I mean, it didn't, in a weird way, because honestly, I mean, the trauma of that in the 9-minute and 29-second video, which had been broadcast, still is broadcast, ad nauseum on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, all the big American stations, local stations. I had to kind of like shut myself down because I couldn't watch that public execution anymore. I mean, you might as well put them in a guillotine, for God's sake, might as well, So, no, George Floyd was not, I mean, it was a part of me, obviously, but it was not a part of that story. Like, again, it was more about Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow book and me having a desire to write the late Mr. Kent in my way, episode. So, yeah, that's where that came from, really. Yeah.
But I think at the time it was released, obviously that was sort of a big thing. So I think that may have helped the impact of the story, if that makes sense. But for those that haven't sort of read it, in this series, Superman and Clark Kent, or mostly Clark Kent, help a Black man who's incarcerated falsely. Bud Oakwood and Evans got the issue in his hands just there. Oh, and Ashley.
Awesome!
Falsely arrested and jailed. But yeah, that's a very loose synopsis. And I don't want to give too much away, because I think you should really, this is for the readers, you should really go and read it for yourselves, because it's really, really,
it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Holy shit.
I agree. No, you just that's fine.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
Okay. And this is, I'm asking you about your back matter in your head, because it's not explained in the story. Where does this guy get his hands on kryptonite handcuffs?
Okay. I originally wanted to get more into that, but I can if they ever give me another shot at Superman. I don't know if it'll happen.
Do it.
I do believe it's in my mind. I have this whole storyline about a black market, because this comes from Superman 3, by the way, the movie, where Richard Pryor makes that. He can't find that last piece. He puts cigarette tar in it, which is hilarious. But I thought that what if, and this is not Luthor, somebody else is mass producing black market red and green and blue with gold, all these different kryptonites, right? They work, but they don't work, right? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I don't have an idea of who it would be. I just had an idea that it would be a great year-long story to find out who was trafficking in black market kryptonite. Because guess what? You can make bullets out of that. And even though they're like weak, it will penetrate his flesh. And that's all you need. Especially a green kryptonite bullet would do it. Red kryptonite maybe not so much, but a green kryptonite bullet, he's done. No more Superman. So that to me would be a threat that Clark would take very seriously. And that in that investigation, it would lead to like a year worth of crazy, wacky storylines and stuff like that. But that's where I still don't have a person yet. I mean, it would have to be somebody from like a Star Labs, or it would have to be somebody with access, because you just can't synthesize kryptonite. Like you stumble into kryptonite, you don't stumble into kryptonite, So it would have to be something like that, And I had so many ideas, but I mean, I don't have a person, But yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for that, because I'm still thinking about it, but I don't know if they'll ever let me, pursue that again.
That would be awesome.
Well, I hope so.
I hope so.
If you could mass produce gold kryptonite, that is like that would not be good.
There's a moment in Truth and Justice which, well, they kind of take on different scales and levels of racism as well. So you've got the blatant racism.
Oh yeah.
And you've also sort of got the people that are racist, but they don't really realize they're racist, and just things like that. So there's a few moments in this issue that sort of stood out to me, and it was the line that Superman can punch a Nazi or a Klansman, but what can he do about a terrified suburban mom? I love that. And also the moment where Clark is on the tube, I think, and he's overhearing all these different conversations with the passengers from like different walks of life. Why was it where did all that come from, and why was it important for you to get those different levels of viewpoints across?
Okay, so wow, that's another one. Give me a minute. I have a really good answer for this one. Okay, so what I think where it comes from is, for me, is this, right? I'm 6'2", you can't tell, but I'm not a small person, And when I'm in public spaces, and if you read, I used to be a school teacher, and one of the side effects of being a school teacher is you learn to read body language, just like the FBI teaches you and all the other people, right? So if you read body language, you can tell when somebody's comfortable with you or they're terrified, right? You can just tell.
Yeah.
And I've been out and about, and there's an aggregate of just people reacting to your presence negatively. And you just start to be like, all right, come on. Like, I'm not going to do anything. It's 12 noon, for God's sake, But what I think is not so much racism, but anti-Blackness. Because racism is such an umbrella term, but specifically what I wanted to get to is anti-Blackness. It's not so, because there are people who have no problem with Asians or Latinos or, people from the Middle East, but they really don't like Black people. They're cool with everyone else except African Americans or Black people, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes this thing where I feel like people are no longer, because we have this thing in the US with the political correctness, and it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you don't want to be disrespectful, but on the other hand, the flip side is that people don't say what they really feel. So what's happened in the US, and I think what led to Trump's, right, one of the things that led to Donald Trump's election was that there was this perception that you can't say what you feel about anything anymore. Then Trump starts saying those things, and then people explode because they're like, yes, that's how I feel, right? So I feel like those conversations that are in the book, those are conversations I've heard. These are conversations I've had with people who felt like they couldn't say this stuff, without being chastised or, put upon or set upon, right? So I wanted to get into that kind of like casual anti-Blackness and fear, because all of it is fear. Yoda said it best, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Well, that's what happens. People are like I'll give you the best example on a neuro-linguistic level, the basic of it. People say, I hate spiders. You don't hate a spider, you're afraid of them. Yeah. But the word that comes to your mind is hate, right? The same thing happens with Black people. I'm afraid of Black people. I hate Black people, And if somebody could just talk about their fear and what fuels it, maybe somebody got mugged, maybe some Black guy, broke their window once, maybe they're in school and some Black guy took their girlfriend, whatever it is. But wherever that comes from, it's never addressed. It just sits there.
It builds
and it festers, just like cancer. And it builds up on people, like where they live, where they work. You hear it when people they call it dog whistles. Like they don't say the actual thing, like urban. We all know what urban means in the US. It means Black. You don't say, or thug. That's a new way to say N-word, right? But that's what people are saying. And I feel like people need to start just saying how they feel, even if it's wrong. You know, just if you're afraid, why are you afraid? Just talk it out. No one's going to beat you up. Just talk it out. And I felt like in the story, some of the things that Clark overheard or Clark interviewed, these are things that people actually feel. People actually say this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, for example, there's a panel where an Asian woman says, my family came here, can't they? Why are they always complaining? Well, these are conversations that Asian Americans, this is stuff Asian Americans say. They won't say it publicly, but I know they say it, because I've heard people say it, So I feel like it's very, very important for people to talk about their feelings, whether it be race, class, gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is, just put it out. Like I tend to be more left of center on a global scale, not the U.S. because the U.S. left is still right wing compared to like most of the global. Like when I look at the British system, I'm like, you got Labour, you got center left, you got these people, you got that people. I'm like, wow, you got all these different perspectives. But then it's like here, it's just like Democrat and Republican. I'm like, no, that doesn't encompass it all, right? If I said publicly, it would get me in trouble. And it's not even bad, but it's just that people are so sensitive to like discussion now. And I think if we don't get to this point where we can talk honestly about whatever, then nothing's going to change. Things are only going to get worse if people are like, it's holding it inside. And when and we all know when you repress anything, whether it be sexual stuff, whether it be racial stuff, whether it be financial stuff. Like if you're tired of being poor, but you can't say it to nobody, and one day you just like, God damn it, I'm tired of this. That's what happens.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where I wanted to put into the book, just to get it out there and stop pretending that you don't have these feelings or fears or biases. It doesn't make you wrong to have. We all have biases. Like there's neighborhoods I won't live in. There's neighborhoods I won't eat in. It doesn't make me wrong. I just don't want to eat there.
Yeah.
But I'll explain if someone asks me, why don't you want to go over there? Well, this is why.
Yeah.
With real substantial things, not like prejudice, but like, because, 15 cars got broken in over there. I'm not going over there. I like my car. I don't want my car broken in. I have a bunch of stuff I keep in my car. So stuff like that, I think, is what kind of informs that's what informed those ideas in that story.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just going through my notes now, but we've already talked about why Clark takes the center stage. But like I said, this is my favorite issue of 2021 so far. Whoever may beat it, we'll see, but it's very high on the list. But how have you personally found the response to that issue?
It's been interesting because I don't see a lot of response. Like I see like reviews and stuff, but I would have liked for there have been more conversation about it. But at least for me, I felt like it kind of came out. It was a blip on the radar, and then it kind of like faded away. And I'm trying to keep it in the in the discourse without being too like pushing too far. But with comics, because so many comics come out per week and per month, if some like 6 months ago, like for example, in Marvel about a year ago, Age of X was like the biggest thing everybody's talking about. No one's talking about Age of X anymore, which is the X-Men storyline. Yeah. And that was huge. And it's pretty much gone out of discourse. Mm-hmm. So with comics, you have to kind of strike while the iron is hot, or else you look really stupid after a while. Like, see this is read my book, no. So what will happen is when award season comes around, and if I'm blessed enough to get some nominations, I think that'll push it back to forefront, because I don't think it's sold out anywhere. Like I think it had respectable sales, but it didn't like sell out, So we'll see how it goes. Like if it's sold out, then it would be a different conversation. Yeah. But Superman books are tough, because of I'm not going to criticize Brian Michael Bendis, but the Bendis run didn't have the sales record it should have had, or that DC would have preferred. Yeah. So it's gonna even though Kennedy, he's awesome. I love that guy. Mm-hmm. He's going to reestablish faith, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Yeah. It's sort of like when your favorite restaurant, they find rats in a burger or something. You know, you want them to go back there. I'm not saying that this is the same. I'm saying, like, a restaurant and it was a rat in a soup. You're just like, yeah, I'm gonna take. It takes a while to rebuild the trust a little bit. So
I know what you mean, and I think with Truth and Justice, because it debuted as digital, I think I don't know. Whenever I've read an issue that's digital first and then it gets released, I find that people don't tend to know about it as much as the physical ones. And when I've sort of, because obviously we do the reviews on the site and we talk about it on the podcast, and then I'll share the review in like on Facebook or Reddit or something, and there's so many people that said that they've never heard of it and they didn't realize that Truth and Justice was a Superman story, because obviously issue 1 was Vixen, so it's obviously tackling different characters. So a lot of Superman fans in particular don't really understand or know that it's a Superman story, which is a shame.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and I think you'll get retroactive hype, you know, like random blogs like us being like, hey, you missed this, you know, like, and
which I appreciate a lot.
I think that'll happen.
Yeah. Oh. So one thing I didn't mention about this issue, which is on a much lighter note to the tone and what we've been talking about before, but there's a moment there where Superman uses heat vision to dehydrate somebody. I've never seen that before. Is that something new that you brought in, or did you sort of take it from somewhere else?
No, I mean, I sit around and think about ways Superman could use his powers in different ways, you know, and I'd never seen it before.
Yeah.
I never read it anywhere. And I just thought, okay, he doesn't have to direct, because like the thing is, he's directing it as like a pinpoint. But he doesn't have to do that. He can like spread it out. So if you use the heat and you aim it at a human body, which is, you know, 73% water, or 90, whatever the hell it is, you know, you're gonna dry him out. You know, and this guy's already wearing body armor. Just heat it up a little bit. It's like being in a hot pot, you know. Water, it starts really cold and it gets hotter and you don't notice it and then you're boiled to death.
Yeah.
I figured if he could do that, because he can't get close to the guy, how do you stop him? That was one of my ways. I mean, I have a lot of tricks that how Superman could beat somebody without getting close to them physically.
Yeah. And
that was one of them. So yeah, that was I made that up.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think when I read that, I messaged the group and I was like, has he ever done this before? I don't remember this, but yeah, it's great. And annoyingly now I need to know about all these other ideas and ways that Superman can use his powers, so please get on another Superman book.
I don't want to use them up, but it's just like, you know, for example, you know, if he has to fight a bunch of robots, which you can destroy, if he freezes them all and then does a shockwave, you know, punches the ground, they shatter. He doesn't have to get close to them. Yeah. Like Metallo, for example. You know, Metallo's metal and he has a green kryptonite heart. You can't get close to Metallo. Or, for example, Parasite. You know, you can't get close to him. How do you beat somebody you can't get close to? Superman has enough powers where he could easily defeat Metallo, but Metallo's fast and strong too. And he can move real fast for a cyborg, right? So the trick is, if you froze all of his internal, or overheated his internal assembly, he would just fall, he'd stop. But Metallo's tough. You know, Parasite, another one, very difficult, because if you aim anything at him, he may be able to absorb that and use it against you, right? So I thought of ways of using sound waves, of using shock waves, of using dirt, you know, things that, you know, like, for example, if he was fighting Parasite at a beach, right? He could throw up enough sand and heat it up and it turns into glass. Sure. You know, because sand is silicon. Heat it up. He sends thousands of tiny, like hundreds of, millions of shards of glass into Parasite's body. It won't kill him, but it'll hurt him, you know, without using physical force or energy. So, like, or kinetic energy for that matter. So I sit around and think about stuff like that. You know, I'm weird, but I think about ways right. I'm in the right company, but yeah, I think about ways Superman can beat somebody without getting close. So those are some of the things I would come up with, that I've come up with. You know?
Yeah. So retrospectively, then, how did you find working with such an iconic character like Superman?
In what way? What do you mean?
Like, was it better
I'm-
than Spider-Man or Judge Dredd? Like, was there an extra weight on you, or were you more like super happy while you're doing it, or?
When I got the gig, I was overjoyed because it was like Mr. Miracle backups, then Red and Blue was it was Mr. Miracle backups, Truth and Justice, then Red and Blue. Red and Blue was offered first, but I didn't write it for a while because we were like figuring everything out and the release, because like the pandemic messed up all the release schedules for everybody. And so we were trying to figure it out. So that's how that worked. But it was a sense of fulfillment, of joy, of accomplishment that I'd finally checked that off the box. And hopefully I get to do it again. I would love to. I would love to like write action comics or Superman.
Of course, yes.
It would be a dream. I don't know if I'll ever get the chance, but it would be a dream. But I already accomplished it. So it's like, it would just be adding more frosting to the top, you know what I mean? But so that's basically it. It was great. I mean, I have no other superlatives, no pun intended, but it was a fantastic experience, overall,
Let's see. Jasmine, you want to do the next notes?
Yeah, so we spoke a bit on Twitter before the interview, and you said that you said it in the interview as well, but you're the first person of color to write Judge Dredd, and you're also the first Westerner to have written it.
Well, first African American.
Yeah.
No, there were some black British folk who did it, but I was the first African American.
Okay, sorry. But you seem to be constantly wanting to push the boundaries when it comes to being the first to do things, and which I fully admire. So how do accomplishments like that make you feel, and do they kind of push you to do more? What you're making history pretty much.
Yeah, when you go into it, you don't realize certain things. Like when I got the Judge Dredd gig, and I pitched it, and I was like, holy crap, they let me do this. You don't think of it that way. I didn't know until much later when I was doing, like, there's a guy who he just wrote for 2000 AD. I think his name is Joseph Elliott. He's a Black British writer, and he's done like some novel stuff and some stuff for 2000 AD in the actual program. And he had told me there were, I think, a Jamaican-born British person who had written Judge Dredd way back, like earlier. I believe so, right? But there had never been an African-American person who's ever written Judge Dredd, because there's not a lot of Americans who have written Judge Dredd. It's a very small population, because 2000 AD, generally speaking, everyone thinks Americans are stupid. And the whole world thinks we're all dumb. So the trick is that the 2000 AD is no exception. So they didn't think Americans could get satire, and you're not supposed to be rooting for Judge Dredd, because all the American stuff, they usually make him like the hero, and it's like, you're not supposed to be actually rooting for him.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be like, wow, this society, I do not want to live in Mega City 1. I do not want to be in this world. I mean, it's great to read it. Hilarious stuff. I mean, some of the greatest comic stories ever have come out of 2000 AD. Like Rogue Trooper, other stuff, not just Dredd. Great stuff, over the years. And, but yeah, I mean, you don't think about it that way until you sit down and you do the math of it, so to speak. And I was looking around, I was like, whoa, I am the first African American to write Judge Dredd, like, ever, And usually, to me, it's more about, I just want to get this gig. And then something like, for example, I'm not the first Black person to write Superman. There were like, I think 8 or 9 other people ahead of me. So I was just like number 9. Okay, that's no big deal, whatever. But it's great to have that.
Still, that's not that many people, though, is it?
Right?
So you're in a small group of people there.
Very small. But a very small group of people historically have ever written. Sit down and you go through the DC Wikipedia stuff. And you just like, it's not as many as you would think, and it's very, like, same thing with X-Men, same thing with Captain America, like, there's not a lot of people. Same thing with Spider-Man, it's rare air to be able to be entrusted with a $1 billion character, period. And that's the scary part. It's like, holy Christ, what?
So we kind of touched on what you would want to work on in terms of IDW, but what was your holy grail of writing job to work on in the future? So would it be comics, TV, film? What characters would you want to work with?
Well, first, I mean, I'm still doing original stuff, so I would I'm a big space opera fan. You know, stuff like Dune and Starship Troopers, and obviously Star Trek, Star Wars. I mean, there's a Japanese anime called Legend of the Galactic Heroes, which is like a strong. If you like space opera, if you haven't seen Legend of the Galactic Heroes, you need to start immediately. It's my highest recommendation. Right? So, like, first to get an original space opera that I created into like television, that's like really my goal. That's actually my goal, right? Or a movie franchise. Yeah. That's the goal. Yeah. But in terms of other people's stuff, like Blade Runner, Dune, like I have so many ideas for both universes. I mean, I may not get to ever do it, but those would be great. Yeah. You know, because you could go anywhere in the timeline. It doesn't have to be just Deckard. You know, you can go forward in the timeline or backward in the timeline. How did you get to Blade Runner to begin with? Same way with Dune. Like Dune takes place in the year 10,000 something AD, right? What happened between 2021 and 10,000 AD to get you to that point? Yeah. I mean, I know about the Butler, the Jihad and all that stuff, but there's all these gaps in the world of Dune that can be filled in. Same thing with Blade Runner. You know, I'm trying to think of other franchises I really enjoy, but those are the two off the top of my head that I would say I would love to kind of play around in, you know, and see what I could come up with and really get into it, because there's so much you could go into with both that they still haven't even scratched the surface of, you know.
Some closing questions before we let you go. Mm-hmm. I am an indie author. Here's some of my
what's
The Black Blossom.
Hey, feel free to send it to me. I'd love to read it.
Dude, I shall.
Please.
So I was wondering, do you have any tips for people like me or other aspiring professionals? How do you even get to like a lesser publisher like Ahoy or IDW or something, where it's like it's still not like super indie, but it's a little more mainstream? How do you even get noticed by?
First, never refer to him as a lesser publisher, ever. Yeah, no,
well, I mean, like,
never. Yeah, I'm just saying, never refer to him that way. But no, realistically, okay. So here's the difference: you have a product already, so you're in a different space than somebody who's aspiring. Most aspiring people I've met don't have a damn thing written at all. So the first thing is to have a product, have something to show. It doesn't have to be a comic; it could be a short story. It could be a novella. It could be a short film. It could be a podcast with fiction material, like a radio program or a radio show, right? Radio drama, excuse me. So that kind of stuff, I think, is very important, because now, like, for example, when I was breaking into comics in the late 90s, the internet was still dial-up. So right, yes. It wasn't a whole lot of content in regards to how do you break into whatever. You had to find communities like in Usenet, like, you know, rec.arts.comics, whatever, right? You had to find the CompuServe had professional writers like J.M. Straczynski even did stuff, you know, online back then, right? Creative Babylon Bob, you know, you had to really dig hard to find this information. Now you can go to Google and learn. Like they have masterclass.com, which has every possible creative pursuit, and you can listen to Natalie Portman talk about acting and listen to Martin Scorsese talk about directing. You can listen to Malcolm Gladwell and Neil Gaiman, talk about, right? I mean, you could pay, those things are all out there. So the bar to entry or the bar to create or learning how to create is no longer existing. There's no barrier anymore. Now what's stopping people is their lack of ambition and generally procrastination and laziness, quite frankly, So I would say, not saying to you, but in general, I have a podcast called Writing for Rookies, where I talk about all this stuff, right? The trick is, first of all, use the internet as a resource as opposed to a procrastination source, right? And if you're online, looking at YouTube videos for a day and do some research, there are literally thousands, if not millions of websites just about creative writing. Read Stephen King's book on writing, which is the greatest creative writing course you could ever take. And it's by Stephen King, the audio on creative writing from Stephen King, right? That I recommend. Robert McKee's Story book. The book is called Story. That's another one. I find, and this is my personal observation, and this is I find that a lot of people who claim to want to be writers don't have what it takes. And I don't mean creatively. I mean sticking to a dream. Instead of just saying you want to be a writer, do it. Like dancers dance, singers sing, firefighters fight fires, writers write.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people I know say they want to be writers. They don't write. See them on Facebook and Twitter. They're posting nonsense all day instead of writing. They're arguing with people about movies and TV shows. And it's like, dude, no studio cares about this. But in fact, if you hate it so much, you're giving it free advertising by saying how much you hate it. Like something that's in pop culture, because I don't care. I'm not giving anybody free advertising. If I like it, I'll talk about it. But if I don't like, for example, I didn't watch it, but Falcon and Winter Soldier, right? I don't talk about Falcon and Winter Soldier because I didn't watch it. Why am I going to give them free advertising, right? So a lot of people spend an inordinate amount of time, and they waste an inordinate amount of time playing around online instead of either doing research or actually writing. So the first hurdle to get over is to prioritize your creative pursuit. Don't play around. Like you actually have a book. So you're not even in this category. They're always online talking about, like if you're talking about a novel, but you're not writing it, then you're wasting your time. If you're a dancer and you say, I want to dance, you need to practice every day. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a lawyer, you got to go to law school. You have to train your mind. Same thing being a writer. Anybody can write, but not anybody can be a writer. Like anybody can dance, but not anybody can be a dancer and get paid for it. So to get to that point, you have to stop playing around. Not you per se, but a person. Stop playing around. Stop messing around online. Stop arguing online. Stop texting and chatting all day. How about creating? Like your group here, you've created something. You have a podcast. Like you can't just say, I'm a Superman fan. No, I'm a Superman fan with a podcast. Like the Superman homepage guys, like the Superman homepage. They did something. You have something. Because what are people arguing? They argue about Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones isn't an idea. It's a product, right? People argue about Doctor Who ad nauseum. But guess what? It's a product. It's BBC exists. It's on, and Sky News is Sky Channel in Great Britain. It exists. There are things on that people created. So it's not that people are just blustering. You have to have something. And this is what drives me crazy. I meet people all the time. There was a guy, I'll tell you real quick. There was a guy I met in 2011 when I really started doing conventions and doing panels at conventions. He was like, yeah, I liked your work on Thundercats. How do I be a writer? I spent 30 minutes telling this guy, saying, this is what you need to do to break into animation writing. 2012, same guy, same panel, same situation.
All right.
This happened up until 2016, where I eventually lost my patience. I said, dude, you've been asking me this question for like 5 or 6 years. What have you been doing all this time? And he was just like, blah, 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 blah. No, you never, don't ask me this again.
Yeah.
Because you haven't done it. It's been 5 years.
Yeah.
Do something, right? Mm-hmm. So I would just say do something. Like the old Nike ad, do it. You just do it. And people are gonna suck at first. Like my early stuff is horrible. I thought it was great, but it was horrible. And then I look back at it, I'm like, fuck, this is so embarrassing. But over time, you get better. So I feel the same thing is with any writing. Start writing, I give great examples of how to build universes, how to world build. I'll give you a great one. George R.R. Martin, back in the late 80s, did a series right before he did Game of Thrones called Wild Cards. And it's a book, it's a prose superhero universe before anyone was doing prose superhero universes. It starts in 1939, but it's like Watchmen. It's like the real world, right?
Oh.
You know, it's a series of short stories in a shared continuity, just like The Witcher. The original Witcher books were a series of short stories in a shared continuity. Like, what's stopping anybody from doing? Because prose is the easiest thing to write. Comics cost money. You can write a 1,000-page novel as long as you got electricity and a computer and a word processing program. Low overhead. And I talk to people about low overhead all the time. They don't take it seriously, or they just don't think, they don't understand to make the connection. So my best advice is to stop fooling around, sit down and do it. Just start writing a story, start outlining. Like, even if you write an outline, that's better than nothing. That's something to build, you know, or write some like log lines, like blah, blah, blah does blah, 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 and wants this, and will they make it? You know, you got to have a seed of an idea. And if you don't cultivate that seed, it's just nothing. So that's my advice, is to just start. You have to fail. You have to be willing to fail repeatedly as a writer before you taste that first success, because that's all it is. A series of failures until somebody says yes.
Awesome, man.
Well,
Thanks.
So yeah, to close out, so you look into the future, you've got Mr. Miracle currently coming out. What else is, well, can you tell us anything about that, and what else have you got coming up?
Sure. So Mr. Miracle, The Source of Freedom #1, I don't know if it's released internationally, but it is released May 25th. It's coming out next week as of this recording. It's only a few days away. I'm really nervous and excited, but Mr. Miracle #1 is dropping, the Shiloh Norman version. I have a Batman story coming out in the fall. It's Batman versus Azrael versus Ra's al Ghul.
oh, nice.
That's going to be, yeah, it's in the new Legends of the Dark Knight anthology.
Okay, cool.
And it probably will hit like October or November. So that's coming out. I'm working at Blizzard Entertainment right now, and I'm one of the writers on Overwatch 2. And I'm also writing some stuff for Hearthstone, if you play those games. So I'm working with them, and I'm doing some video game stuff. And there's a couple more things that I'm not allowed to discuss yet. You know, there's a couple of gigs that I have that I'm up for, that I'm really hoping I get. So, but yeah, generally speaking, those are the things. Mr. Miracle's coming out in a few days. Overwatch, I don't know when Overwatch 2 is coming out.
Yeah.
But the Batman book is dropping in the fall. And there's a couple other things. Like I said, there's a few things up in the air, but those are the things that I've got going on right now. And you can still watch Transformers: War for Cybertron. The third season is about to drop, called Kingdom, which is Beast Wars, basically. But I wrote half of season 1, so that was pretty cool. And so, like, I worked on the Black Panther animated series, which is still on Disney Plus. I worked on Agent Carter season 2. And that's on Disney Plus as well. So a lot of my stuff is still out there that you can watch and check out. So yeah, and I'm really proud and thankful and honored to be on your podcast. This is a lot of fun, and
thank you.
I'm still a fan.
Thank you for coming.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and speaking all those things that you can still catch from Brandon, Truth and Justice issue 2 if you're picking up physically, and 4, 5, and 6 if you're reading digitally. Yeah, please do pick it up, because it's really, really, really good. And I don't say it lightly. It's the best comic, Superman comic.
Top tier.
2021.
Thank you very much.
I do want to say, sir, you made my day, because Superman the Animated Series is my favorite on-screen Superman, and the late
right
was my favorite episode of that show. So
Tim Daly is amazing, underrated, and as was George Newbern. Also very underrated Superman.
Well, yeah, honestly, thank you so much, Brandon, for taking the time to talk Superman with us. It's been an absolute pleasure getting more insight into your work, and I think we really did delve quite deep into this one. So I honestly can't wait to see what you do next, and I really hope we get to see you on Man of Steel again soon. Fingers crossed for that. And yeah, that wraps up this interview and this episode. And once again, thank you for taking the time to listen, and we hope to see you again next time for episode 10.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to this episode and previous episodes in the podcast if you have done so. Remember, if you're enjoying the show so far, please do subscribe, share the podcast with a friend, and most importantly, leave us a review. It's those reviews that really help with our visibility and success, and it only takes you a few moments to leave one. As well as that, if you want to find out more about us, head over to our website, www.theaspiringkryptonian.com. And if you want to follow us individually on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. So I'll drop those links in the episode description so you can get to know us a little bit better. A very quick shout out to some other very good Superman-related podcasts and accounts that we love. The Last Sons of Krypton podcast, the Krypton Report podcast, and Adam Talking Superman over on Twitter. They have some really great Superman-centric discussions and are always dropping great Superman knowledge, so if you are looking for something similar to our show and our account, please be sure to check them out.